Lyra Quell walked through the security arch and got the green light. No questions. No delay. That should be impossible. Then she saw it, a corridor where the cameras do not overlap. The Grey Walk. If this academy is neutral, why did someone build a place with no record? Because here, one mistake becomes a clip, and one clip becomes policy. The scan should have flagged her. Lyra Quell stepped under the arclight intake arch and felt a warm sweep cross her skin. The security frame clicked like a camera shutter. Her wrist unit blinked green. No alarms. No questions. No pause. That was the first pressure point. Neutral academies did not miss unknown variables. They logged them, tagged them, and filed them into systems that never forgot. If Arclight had chosen not to notice her, it meant someone had already decided what her presence would be used for. Lyra kept her travel case between her boots. She kept her hands still at her sides. One wrong move on this ring could become a clip. One wrong clip could become policy. Her goal was simple and immediate. Stay under the surface. Map the mechanism. Send proof home before the ring decided Earth was the problem. Kheledra High Ring cut a thin arc above the planet, calm from a distance and predatory up close. The docking tug caught the shuttle with a clean jolt. The cabin lights cooled. A recorded voice welcomed them to Arclight Academy with a tone that sounded friendly and final. Station air rolled in, dry and scrubbed. It carried faint metal and citrus that made neutrality feel manufactured. On the wall beside the arch, a poster listed prohibited items with cheerful icons and wording that left room for exceptions. Another sign reminded everyone that recordings were property of the Academy. That meant truth could be leased. Ahead, a corridor junction bent slightly. Two camera pods should have overlap there. They did not. Their fields faced away from each other by a margin that was too clean to be sloppy. Above the bend, a sign read the Grey Walk. Why would a neutral academy build a blind pocket on purpose? Warden Ilex Rowe waited beyond the arch, tall and unreadable in a dark uniform with silver trim and no loose straps. He stood with the calm of someone who had ended problems quietly and slept afterward. His gaze took in her case, her shoes, her hands, and the corners behind her. Then it returned to her face. Lyra Quell, he said. Exchange intake, Lyra replied. He read her access packet fast, then scanned the crowd as if the paper mattered less than the eyes around it. Arclight is neutral ground, Ilex said. Neutral does not mean unguarded. He gestured to a wall display where rules scrolled in tidy columns. Blades and edge tools are prohibited, except registered technical implements, Ilex said. A tool is a tool until someone decides otherwise. What counts as registered? Lyra asked. Anything issued by Arclight, he said. Anything inspected by Arclight. Anything recorded by Arclight. Lyra nodded. She heard the gap in his phrasing like a seam you could pry open. Issuance meant control. Inspection meant discretion. Recording meant someone else owned the story. Ilex leaned in by a fraction. Do not test the system, he said. Do not let others test it through you. That depends on the others, Lyra said. For a heartbeat, approval flickered in his eyes, then vanished. A guide drone floated in and projected a route through the Arclight concourse. Intake became a corridor of polished alloy, soft light, and quiet signage that told you where to go without asking what you wanted. Cooling vents breathed along the ceiling in measured pulses. Maintenance bots moved like white insects, always cleaning. Their lenses were too small to notice and too steady to ignore. Lyra cataloged camera pods as she walked. The seams were clean. The spacing was even. Then she reached the Grey Walk junction again. Two pods faced away from each other. Their fields did not overlap. Between them, a short corridor bent just enough to create a pocket. Students took longer routes without thinking. Their bodies avoided the space the way lungs avoided smoke. A patrol drone traced a loop that curved around the bend, as if instructed not to see. Lyra drifted closer, as if she were lost. She stepped into the corridor and counted. At step 8, the nearest pod was behind the bend. At step 13, the second pod still could not see her. She stopped in the middle of the pocket and looked up. A ceiling seam sat where a service panel should have been. The seal looked newer than the surrounding alloy. It had been opened and closed with care. A thin line of fresh polymer clung to the edge. A person could do a lot in a pocket like this. A person could also disappear in it. The most dangerous part was how normal it looked. The most dangerous part was how easy it would be to call it an accident. Lyra walked out without pausing and stored the geometry in her head. The point was never bravery. The point was a map. Her assigned room was precise and bare. A folding bed, a sealed terminal, a locker with a biometric latch. The terminal came with a printed warning that attempts to access restricted systems would be logged and prosecuted. It sounded like protection until you wondered who owned the logs. Her wrist unit blinked once. A single line appeared from Terran Oversight Cell. Maintain cover. Do not initiate contact. Lyra read it once and let the screen go dark. Orientation took place in a tiered hall with an empty stage and seating that ensured everyone could see everyone else. Lyra chose a spot with 2 exits and kept the wall at her back. The administrator's voice washed over her. She watched the audience instead of the slides. The speech praised cooperation and shared safety, but the hall smelled of filtered air and quiet resentment. 3 rows down, Brackenvar sat wide in his seat, too certain and too comfortable. Jex Roller leaned close to him, scanning faces with a grin already loaded. Tarn Severick sat on the other side, gloves on indoors, eyes flat, fingers flexing once in a slow rhythm that looked like patience and felt like threat. Bracken caught someone watching and smiled. It was not friendly. It was proprietary. After orientation, Lyra passed a dining alcove where students traded rumors like ration packs. Someone mentioned humans as a Class 12 hazard rating and laughed too loudly. The laugh stopped when Lyra glanced their way. Lyra did not react. Reaction was what they were buying. Later, traffic thickened near the Grey Walk Junction. It was not a crowd, only a knot that blocked passage while pretending it did not. Bracken stood at the center, shoulders wide, owning the air around him. Jex leaned against the wall with easy amusement. Tarn watched the corridor like a sentry. A student approached in a worn academy jacket. He slowed when he saw them. His eyes flicked toward the camera pods. Then away. Bracken stepped into his path. No detours today, Bracken said. I am late, the student said. Move. Bracken held out a hand. Access sigil card, he said. Pay the fee. It is mine, the student said. Bracken smiled. Nothing here is yours. The student tried to step past. Tarn shifted and blocked with one shoulder, gentle as a door closing. Jex laughed under his breath. He thinks rules are real, Jex said. Jex lifted a small slate. A disciplinary acknowledgement filled the screen. It was templated, tidy, and already waiting for a signature. Lyra saw the pre-filled fields and felt her jaw tighten. Only the name was missing. That meant this was not a whim. This was a harvest. The student stared at the slate, swallowed, and touched the screen. The device chirped. Jex pulled it back fast, like a thief claiming a receipt. Bracken took the card, tapped it once against his palm, and handed it to Tarn. Tarn slipped it into an inside pocket without looking down. Bracken stepped aside and traffic resumed around them as if nothing had happened. The student moved on with his eyes down. Witnesses did what the system trained them to do. They looked away. Lyra stayed still and watched the spacing. Bracken shielded the slate from cameras. Tarn blocked sight lines. Jex placed himself where witnesses would focus on his face instead of the form. It was choreography, not chaos. It looked like practice for someone behind Bracken. It looked like someone needed the victim to consent on paper. Jex's gaze snagged on Lyra. He nudged Bracken with an elbow. Bracken turned and studied her, eyes running over her frame slow and appraising. Terran, Bracken said, tasting the word like a rule. Lyra walked on, not hurried and not hesitant. Bracken fell in a step beside her, as if invited. He matched her pace with insulting ease. You saw that, Bracken said. I saw traffic, Lyra replied. Behind them, Jex followed, amused. Tarn stayed back, quiet, watching hands. Bracken leaned closer. People here learn fast, he said. They learn who gives orders. He bumped her shoulder. It was light and deliberate. Show me your bag. Bracken said. Lyra stopped. Bracken stopped too, surprised that something small could refuse. Lyra raised her hands, palms open. It was a harmless posture and a ready posture at once. Request it through security, she said. If you have cause. I have cause, Bracken said. You exist. Footsteps approached behind them, steady and timed, not hurried. Instructor Sarek Voss entered the junction like he belonged there. He did not look at Lyra first. He looked at Bracken. Step away, Sarek said. Bracken spread his hands. Just welcoming our exchange student, Bracken said. Step away, Sarek repeated. Bracken held the smile for a moment, then moved back half a step. It was calculation, not obedience. Sarek's eyes flicked to Lyra, sharp and controlled. Arclight does not need performances, Sarek said. Not in public. Lyra kept her voice steady. Is harassment part of training? She asked. Sarek did not answer directly. He looked at Bracken again. Go, Sarek said, and take your friends. Bracken paused. With respect, instructor, I am within policy, Bracken said. Policy is the Academy's shield, Sarek said. Do not force the Academy to choose. Bracken exhaled through his teeth and turned away with a lazy swagger. Jex followed, still smiling. Tarn followed last, silent as a promise. When they were gone, Sarek faced Lyra. Keep your head down, he said. You arrived quickly, Lyra said. Sarek's gaze flicked toward the gray walk sign and back. People are watching you, Sarek said. They want you to react. Do not give them a story they can sell. Who are they? Lyra asked. More than one, Sarek said. On this ring, perception is a weapon. Treat it like one. Lyra watched him leave. His steps were too steady to be casual. Back at her room, she sat still for a minute and let her breathing settle. Restraint was not softness. On Earth it kept you alive. Out here it might keep your planet alive. Lyra opened her case and took out passive sensor patches, not weapons. She placed one under the desk, one by the vent, and a third inside the door frame where shadow hit it. Patterns mattered more than strength. Her wrist unit buzzed once. A secure channel opened, text only. Terran oversight cell waited without greeting. Lyra typed in short bursts. Blind pocket confirmed at Gray Walk Junction. Students avoid it habitually. Harassment is structured, not impulsive. Access, sigil card extortion, and forced discipline forms observed. Brackenvar is the front blade. Sarek Voss intervened with precise timing. It feels staged. Requests scrutiny on administrative logs and security routing. She sent the message and the channel closed. Lyra listened to the vents. Their steady sound could hide whatever it needed to hide. Someone had built a gap on purpose, and Lyra had made her first irreversible choice. She would not leave this ring with guesses. She would leave it with proof. Lyra Quell left the Academy wing under a sky that was not a sky. Kheledra High Ring curved overhead in a band of lights and service lanes. The planet below looked like painted glass. Night here was a timetable, and the timetable had just shifted. Outer Span Promenade ran along the perimeter like a public sidewalk meant to feel harmless. Benches faced a view corridor. Vending nodes hummed. Students drifted through as if nothing on the ring could be sharp. Lyra walked it because her route planner suggested it was efficient. She also walked it because efficient routes were where rules tended to fray. Voices gathered ahead in a tight knot, low and controlled. The sound carried the shape of an argument without the mess of a real one. Lyra slowed and watched the crowd first, not the center. A dozen students stood at angles that said they were watching and not watching. Feet pointed away, ready to leave. Hands hovered near access badges, as if touch could keep ownership real. No one stepped closer. No one called for security. Brackenvar stood inside that ring of silence, broad enough to look like he had chosen the space. Jex Roller leaned on the rail with lazy confidence, his wrists slate-angled to catch faces. Tarn Severick stood half a pace behind the victims, gloves still on, blocking retreat without needing to shove. 3 adult students were pinned between the rail and a service kiosk. One held a datapad to his chest. Another kept both palms open. The third stared at the deck and did not blink. Bracken held out a hand. Temporary privileges, Bracken said. Hand over your access. It is not temporary, the near student said. It is mine. Jex lifted his slate. Sign the correction, Jex said. A disciplinary acknowledgement filled the screen, already written. It labeled the victim disruptive, late, and non-compliant. The form was clean and complete, waiting only for a name. Tarn produced a knife that looked like a tool until it opened. The lock blade snapped into place with a tight metallic click. Tarn did not wave it. He held it where the victims could see the edge and where the crowd could pretend it was not there. Do not make noise, Tarn said. His voice was quiet. It made people obey. Lyra felt heat in her chest and kept her face neutral. This was the gray walk pattern in open air. It told her something worse than violence. It told her the system expected witnesses and expected them to stay silent. A student near the back raised a wrist to her mouth, then lowered it without speaking. Another took a step forward, then froze when Jex turned his head and smiled. The smile promised paperwork. Lyra scanned the poles along the promenade. 2 camera pods faced outward toward the view corridor. Neither faced the rail. A maintenance drone hovered over the kiosk, lens fixed on a barcode panel. It was watching objects, not people. She could walk away and report later. That was what her cover demanded. Then she saw the victim's hands shaking, not just from fear, but from the effort to stay still. They were surviving a process, not an outburst. Processes could be scaled. Bracken tapped the knives flat with one finger. You have a choice, Bracken said. Sign, and you leave. Refuse, and you explain yourself to the board. The nearest victim lifted his thumb, then hesitated. His eyes searched the crowd for one person willing to be seen with him. No one moved. Lyra realized the most dangerous thing here was not the blade. It was what the crowd had been trained to do. Lyra started forward, keeping her pace normal. She aimed to pass without entering the circle, close enough to measure distance and far enough to deny intent. Jex noticed her first and leaned toward Bracken. Bracken turned with a slow smile, like he had been waiting. Told you the ring would deliver, Bracken said. Lyra did not answer. Tarn shifted and the victims flinched. Jex lifted his slate higher, framing her with a knife and the crowd. A boot hooked her ankle from the side. The traction strip grabbed her sole and stopped her foot while her momentum continued. Lyra hit the deck hard enough to sting, palms catching on cold metal. Laughter rippled, nervous and eager. Bracken stepped into her line of sight and looked down like she was an object under his boot. Earth sends toys now, Bracken said, small and weak. Lyra pushed up on one knee and kept her breathing even. Tarn lowered the lock blade toward her, holding it like a warning and a prop. Stay down, Tarn said. Lyra looked at Tarn's wrist, not the blade. She read Bracken's stance, weight heavy on his front leg. She saw Jex's attention narrow to his recording. She moved when Tarn's focus flickered. Her left hand caught Tarn's knife wrist. Her right hand levered under the joint, driving it against its limit. She turned her hips and stepped through, using Tarn's forward pressure against him. The lock blade popped free into her palm. The motion was tight and ugly, learned in narrow halls where you do not have room to swing. Bracken reached for her arm. Lyra stepped inside his reach, pinned his wrist against her forearm, and twisted. His balance broke when his front leg tried to carry weight it no longer owned. She guided his fall to the deck and used the rail to stop his roll. Bracken hit hard, breath bursting out. Lyra kept the knife low and away from bodies. She turned his arm behind him to a dead angle and held him still. Do not move, Lyra said. You will hurt yourself. She has the blade, someone whispered. She stole it, another voice replied. The words landed like a match in dry air. Tarn rushed first, trying to grab her knife hand. Lyra pushed the blade away and redirected him into the rail. She hooked his elbow and pinned his upper body without striking his head. Jex came next, swinging his slate like a brick. Lyra shifted, let glance off her shoulder, then grabbed his wrist and rotated him to the deck. The slate clattered and slid under a bench. Jex hissed and tried to twist away. Lyra kept him pinned with her knee and held him still. The crowd surged back and raised wrist units. Recording replaced courage. Jex looked up at the cameras and smiled through pain. Get it all, Jex said. Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with station air. This was not only violence. This was capture. Arclight did not do panic. A low tone rolled across the promenade. The nearest light panels sharpened, making faces look guilty. Academy Security Division arrived in 2 quiet vehicles on magnetic pads. Officers stepped out in pairs, visors down, weapons holstered. "Freeze and separate," an officer said. Lyra released Jex first and stood slowly. She set the lock blade on the deck with 2 fingers and stepped back, hands raised, palms forward. Bracken groaned under the lock and tried to roll. Lyra eased pressure just enough to keep him pinned without damage. An officer retrieved the knife with a containment sleeve. Another scanned Tarn's gloves. A third sealed Jex's slate in a bag before he could reach it. The victims were moved behind an officer line, not to protect them, but to keep the scene clean. "Report," the officer said. Lyra spoke like she was reading a log. They were coercing students to sign a disciplinary form and surrender access. Tarn Severt displayed a lock blade to enforce compliance. I intervened after being tripped. Tarn presented the blade toward me. I disarmed him. Brackenvar attempted to seize me. I restrained him. Jex Roller attempted to strike me with a slate. I restrained him. The officer looked to the victims. "Confirm?" she asked. The nearest victim swallowed and stared at Bracken, then at the crowd's cameras. Fear tightened his shoulders, then decision steadied them. "It is true," he said. "They made us sign. They took our privileges. They have done it before." Jex laughed once, sharp. "Say it louder," he said. "Make it real." The officer ignored him and turned to the witnesses. "All recordings will be submitted," she said. "Failure to comply will be treated as obstruction." Protests started and died fast. People complied when the system asked them to. Within minutes, Bracken and his 2 companions were loaded into a transport. The victims were escorted to a medical kiosk for checks, because Arclight loved procedures. Lyra was taken to the discipline annex, where warm white walls tried to make control feel gentle. An interspecies conduct board clerk met her at a desk. The clerk's uniform was neat. Her eyes were tired. "You understand the gravity of what occurred?" she asked. "I understand the sequence," Lyra said. "You will submit a statement and refrain from public comment," the clerk said. "Temporary monitoring measures will be applied." "To whom?" Lyra asked. "All involved," the clerk said after a beat. Lyra signed. She requested the disciplinary form used against the victims. The clerk said it was under review. Lyra requested access logs for outer span promenade cameras. The clerk said logs were internal. Warden Ilex Rowe entered without a sound. He looked at the clerk first, then at Lyra. His eyes carried the fatigue of someone who had seen the same play too many times. "Stages create stories," Ilex said. "Stories create policy." "I did not bring the knife," Lyra said. "I know," Ilex replied. "Knowing and proving are different tasks." He slid a travel notice onto the desk. It was polite. It redirected her routes away from outer span promenade and away from certain junctions that no one named. "You are restricting me?" Lyra asked. "I am restricting the story," Ilex said. "The difference matters to the board, not to you." Lyra left the annex with a notice on her wrist unit and a quiet pressure behind her eyes. In the corridor outside, one of the victims sat with a cup of electrolyte drink, hands still unsteady. He looked up at Lyra like he wanted to thank her. Then he looked away when an administrator approached and placed a hand on his shoulder, guiding him toward a room with no windows. By the next cycle, Brackenvar was back on the concourse. He walked with a stiff shoulder and a grin that said inconvenience, not consequence. Jex's wrist wore a bandage. Tarn wore new gloves. They moved like men who had been reminded of limits, then told those limits did not apply. Rumors moved faster than shuttles. In one corner, people said the Terran attacked 3 students. In another, people said the Terran saved victims from a knife. Concourse media cadre pushed cropped clips that began with Lyra holding the blade and ended before the coercion, with captions that sounded neutral and felt accusatory. Lyra watched a group replay one of the edits in the dining alcove. Jex stood nearby, leaning against a pillar like he was not involved. When Lyra looked at him, he lifted 2 fingers in a casual salute. "You are impressive," Jex said. You are bleeding, Lyra replied. Minor, Jex said. Worth it. He nodded toward the watchers. They will remember the part that scares them, Jex said. Meridian Information Bureau did not speak openly. It did not need to. It fed questions into the stream until questions felt like conclusions. If Terrans were so quick to seize a blade, what else would they seize? If Arclight could not control one exchange student, should it accept more? If a Class 12 world trained its people this way, was it safe to share technology? Lyra watched the framing spread like a clean infection. It did not rely on lies. It relied on fatigue and repetition. In her room, the air vents breathed steady, hiding whatever they needed to hide. Lyra sat at the desk and forced her hands to stop shaking. The tremor came late, the body processing what the mind had postponed. Her wrist unit opened a secure channel. Terran Oversight Cell appeared without greeting. Lyra typed, Outispan promenade confirme l'oblad circulation. Coercion process escalated to public stage. Multiple recordings exist and are being edited. Interspecies Conduct Board response is soft. Brackenvar released quickly. Meridian Information Bureau is shaping narrative. Concourse Media Cadre is distributing cropped clips. Request guidance on counter-framing without exposing mission. The channel closed. Lyra stared at the dark screen and understood the new battlefield. The hardest part would not be Bracken. The hardest part would be surviving the story Jex wanted the Ring to believe. Lyra Quell did not need a feed to know the Ring was talking about her. She could feel it in the way conversations stopped half a second late. She could feel it in the way strangers looked at her hands before they looked at her face. On Kheledra High Ring, nothing traveled faster than a story that could be weaponized. The next morning, a public bulletin appeared on the concourse wall panels with a neutral headline about safety standards. It did not mention her by name. It did not have to. The text praised restraint, praised calm, and warned against unauthorized force. Every student who had watched Outer Span Promenade heard the same message under the polite words. Below the headline, a list of proposed measures scrolled in small print. Temporary monitoring, restricted routes, mandatory de-escalation training for exchange cohorts. It read like bureaucracy, but it felt like a net tightening one knot at a time. Someone wanted the academy to look responsible while making sure the next incident had only one acceptable suspect. Lyra walked past the bulletin without slowing. She counted the people who pretended not to read it and the ones who read it twice. She also counted the ones who watched the watchers. They were quiet operators who did not care about morality, only outcomes. Those eyes were the Meridian blocks. Kind of eyes, calm, patient, and hungry for a clean vote. A small group stood near a kiosk that sold nutrient drinks and cheap heat packs. A replay loop hovered above them, cropped and stabilized. It showed Lyra holding Tarn's Sevrix lockblade before an officer sealed it away. The clip did not show Tarn's blade pointed at anyone. It did not show the disciplinary form. It did not show the victims shaking hands. Jex Roller's work was careful. He had removed the beginning and kept the center, the moment that made strangers feel unsafe. He had tuned the audio so her breathing sounded sharp and Brackenvar's laughter sounded distant, as if the threat belonged to her instead of to them. A student with a pressure collar shook her head. They let Terrans carry that kind of reflex, she said. They should not be here. Another answered softly. She was attacked, the second student said. The first student pointed at the loop. Then why is she holding it? She asked. Lyra kept walking. She wanted to grab the projector and smash it. She wanted to call the lie what it was. The mission inside her chest insisted on silence, because anger was the reaction Meridian Information Bureau was waiting to package. She reached the discipline annex and requested access to the official incident summary. The clerk at the desk offered her a sanitized paragraph and a signature line. Lyra asked for the witness list instead. The clerk hesitated, then slid a slate toward her that displayed only code numbers, not names. You can submit questions, the clerk said. The board will determine relevance. Who determines risk? Lyra asked. The clerk's eyes flicked toward a ceiling pod. The board, she said again. Her voice sounded like a door closing. Outside, a pair of administrators spoke near a ventilation column. They did not notice Lyra at first. Their words carried, because they believed they were speaking in private. The Meridian Block wants a motion, one said. A proposal for sanctions, limitations, oversight. It is premature, the other replied. It is convenient, the first said. They will say the Academy failed to contain a Class 12 hazard. Lyra kept her face still. The phrase Class 12 hazard was not a scientific rating on the ring. It was a political label, a way to turn a planet into a problem. It also turned every exchange student into a test case. It turned her self-control into a public resource. She took the long route back to housing, away from the gray walk, then doubled back and watched it from a distance. Students still avoided the corridor. Patrol drones still curve around it. The gap remained, quiet and intentional, like a mouth that stayed closed until it mattered. That night, her secure channel opened with a single prompt from Terran Oversight Cell. Status. Lyra typed with her wrists resting on the desk to keep her hands from shaking. Narrative is being shaped. Meridian Information Bureau is pushing safety language. Crop footage is circulating. Administrators are discussing a Meridian sanction proposal. My reaction is the lever. The reply arrived a minute later. Do not become the lever. Find a mechanism. Lyra stared at the line until it faded. Mechanism meant the system that made silence profitable. It also meant the system that made Bracken Var return to the concourse smiling. Bracken did not approach Lyra directly again. That was the first sign he had been instructed. The second sign was that victims began to disappear from public spaces. They were escorted to private meetings, then returned with eyes down and mouths shut. The third sign was that a new notice appeared about updated conduct protocols. It placed responsibility on witnesses to report, while offering no protection to anyone who did. Lyra started with the smallest details, the ones that did not look like evidence until they were stacked. She visited the medical kiosk where the outer span victims had been checked and asked about the intake logs. She offered a simple reason, that she wanted to confirm no one had been injured during restraint. The nurse on duty was an adult with tired eyes and a voice filtered through a mask. No fractures, the nurse said. No lacerations from the blade. She paused. The victims requested privacy, the nurse said. Did they sign anything? Lyra asked. The nurse's gaze slid to a locked drawer. They signed an acknowledgement of care, the nurse said. Standard. Lyra thanked her and left. Standard was never standard on a ring where people sold forms like weapons. She spent the next 2 days watching how access sigil cards moved. Students tapped them against door panels and locker latches. The panels answered with green lights or red denials. The denials were not random. They clustered around the same individuals, the same quiet targets, the same times that Bracken's group appeared nearby. At a maintenance alcove, Lyra saw Tarn Severick speaking to a station technician. The technician wore an arc-light tool belt and held a coil of biometric thread spool, the kind used to repair sensor seals. Tar did not touch the spool. He only nodded while the technician slid it into a bag that was not marked with arc-light inventory tags. Lyra recorded the moment with her own wrist unit, not as a picture, but as a time-stamped motion log. If she was forced to surrender video later, she wanted metadata the editors could not cleanly remove. She also noted the technician's gait, a slight limp that made him easy to identify if she saw him again. The next day, she found a thin, adhesive square stuck under the edge of a public bench. It looked like trash until she recognized the micro-pattern of a forensic chrono patch. The patch was designed to log vibration signatures and contact timing. In theory, it helped investigators reconstruct incidents. In practice, it could be used to fabricate them. It could also erase them by replacing one timing trace with another. Lyra did not peel it off. She scanned it with her unit and copied its identifier. Then she walked away and watched who came back for it. An hour later, a different technician arrived, one Lyra had not seen before. The technician wore no academy insignia, only neutral coveralls. He moved with the calm of someone who did not fear being questioned. He crouched, retrieved the patch, and slipped it into a pocket without looking around. Lyra followed at a distance, staying on the far side of foot traffic. The The technician entered a service corridor and stopped at a sealed panel. He pressed his palm to a reader that should have required an arc light clearance. The panel opened. Inside, the corridor smelled of warm electronics and solvent. Lyra did not enter. She marked the panel location and the exact time. Then she turned away before curiosity could become a mistake. A good spy did not collect a secret that could not be carried home. Back in her room, she laid out the pattern on her terminal, careful not to trigger restricted access flags. Access sigil cards being siphoned. Biometric thread moving without. Inventory tox. Forensic chrono patches appearing where they should not. None of it proved a name, but it proved intent. VannaWorks procurement veil fit the shape. The consortium did not need to bully for fun. It needed leverage, credentials, and data. A school full of adult trainees was a controlled environment with plenty of stress and plenty of excuses. Compliance harvest program was a clean phrase for a dirty method. Squeeze people until their choices became predictable, then sell the prediction. Lyra sent a short update to Terran Oversight Cell. Evidence of credential siphoning and off-ledger forensic patches. Likely VannaWorks procurement veil using Academy service channels. Brackenvar appears managed. Need a hard link. The reply was immediate. Hard link or nothing. Expect counteroffer. Lyra read that twice. Counteroffer meant recruitment, bribery, or disappearance. VannaWorks did not waste assets. It either bought them or buried them. The invitation arrived as a message that looked like a student notice. It appeared on Lyra's wrist unit, as if it were part of the social layer arclight encouraged for cohesion. Roster exchange circle. Peer support. Resource matching. Confidential. Lyra did not tap accept. She did not decline. She left it unread for 6 minutes, then opened it as if she had been tempted. The meeting location was a lounge on the edge of the concourse, near a bank of vending nodes and a view corridor that made everyone feel watched by the stars. She arrived early and sat with her back to a wall, facing the room. The lounge was warm by station standards, a few degrees higher, designed to make people relax. 2 students chatted at a table and left quickly when they saw Lyra. A 3rd student lingered near the door and pretended to scroll, eyes flicking up in steady intervals. Then instructor Sarek Voss entered. He did not sit. He stood beside the vending node and studied the room like he was measuring angles. You received the invite, Sarek said. I saw it, Lyra replied. Good, Sarek said. They want you to think you chose it. Lyra kept her voice calm. Who are they? She asked. Sarek looked at her as if the answer would cost him something. On this ring, there is the law, Sarek said, and there is the version of the law that gets filed. You are warning me, Lyra said. I am reminding. You, Sarek replied. Correct and incorrect matter less than the report that survives. Lyra heard the distance in his words. He was not offering friendship. He was offering survival advice that carried its own agenda. You stopped Bracken before, Lyra said. You arrived too quickly. Sarek's mouth tightened. If you believe timing is always coincidence, you will be used, Sarek said. If you believe timing is always conspiracy, you will also be used. Lyra watched a pair of security officers pass the lounge entrance. Their eyes flicked in, then away, as if they had been told not to see. Sarek leaned closer, voice lower. Meridian wants you to lose control in public, Sarek said. VannaWorks wants you to disappear in private. Both outcomes help someone else. What do you want? Lyra asked. Sarek did not answer directly. I want Arclight to stay open, Sarek said. I want this place to be a school, not a machine. He paused. If you're truly here to observe, then observe with discipline. Lyra's wrist unit chimed. The roster exchange circle message updated, a new location, a smaller room, a time change. They're moving it, Lyra said. Sarek nodded once. They're testing whether you follow, Sarek said. Lyra did not move. She let the new location sit on her screen like bait. She imagined walking into a room without cameras and being offered a deal with soft words. She imagined refusing and waking up to a termination letter that looked procedural. She imagined a knife in a pocket where no pod could see and a report that said she escalated. She stood and walked toward the lounge exit, not toward the updated location. Sarek stepped aside without comment. In the corridor, Lyra felt eyes on her from angles she could not map. Someone had been inside her room. She was sure of it now. Her sensor patches had recorded a door frame vibration at a time she had been in class. Too light to trigger an alarm and too precise to be accidental. She returned to her room and found a different brand of sealant on her locker latch. It was a clear film so thin it looked like dust. Someone had tested her access. Someone had wanted her to notice or wanted her to miss it. Lyra opened a secure channel to Terran Oversight Cell. They baited me with roster exchange. Circle. They changed location after arrival. Sarek Voss confirms 2 vectors. Meridian wants public loss of control. Vanna Works wants private removal. My room has been probed. The reply arrived with no comfort. Then you need an answer that works in daylight. Build proof that cannot be edited. Lyra stared at the line. Proof that could not be edited meant logs, cross-verified timestamps, and a chain of custody that survived hostile narration. It meant she had to stop being only a witness and start being a trap. She looked at the gray walk geometry in her head, then looked at the schedule for the next Academy evaluation cycle. There would be a moment soon when the Academy needed clean records more than it needed pride. If she could force both Meridian and Vanna Works to reach for control at the same time, one of them would leave fingerprints. Lyra shut down her terminal and lay on the bed without sleeping. The ring hummed through the bulkheads like distant machinery. Somewhere in the concourse, someone was already rehearsing the report that would decide what her planet was allowed to become. Lyra Quell stopped treating silence as peace. On Kheledra High Ring, silence meant someone had already chosen an outcome and was waiting for the paperwork to catch up. She walked the arc-light concourse as if she were only another adult trainee, but her attention stayed on the seams in the system. The gray walk was one of those seams. 2 camera pods should have overlapped at its bend. They did not. Patrol drones curved around it, as if their route maps had been taught to look away. Kasha Marrow met Lyra beside a vending node that sold warm broth. Kasha was a systems student with a calm face and sharp hands. She moved like someone who counted what others ignored. Vale Karan arrived with a battered note slate and the steady expression of a person who hated being lied to. Vale had the posture of a timekeeper, quiet until the number spoke. I kept time marks, Vale said. Every camera micro-reset near the gray walk. It repeats. Kasha tapped her own pad and brought up the public routing tables. The published coverage cones do not match reality, Kasha said. There is a pocket. Lyra set her wrist unit on the table and pushed a few identifiers across, including the forensic. Chrono patch code she had scanned and the location of the service panel that opened for a technician without Academy clearance. She did not tell a story. She only offered data. They overlaid the tables and the time marks. Each time Brackenvar's group appeared near the gray walk, a pod logged a micro-reset. Each time a victim later received a conduct notice, the reset appeared again in the same narrow window. The resets were too small for most people to notice. They were large enough to hide a handoff or a threat if someone knew where to stand. Lyra built the Ghostline camera gap map on her screen. It was plain and hard to argue with. The gap had edges. It had a schedule. It had a purpose because the Academy kept repairing everything else on the ring while this stayed untouched. The gap is not a failure, Cassius said. It is an invitation. Lyra filed a request for the time-stamp lattice log using Academy language about safety audits. The reply returned in minutes, a denial with policy citations that looked automated. No human reviewed anything that quickly. The denial listed 3 reasons that contradicted each other, as if a machine had stitched them from different templates. Kasha watched the denial scroll. They are filtering you, Kasha said. They want me to know, Lyra replied. If they could make her feel watched, they could make her move wrong. Lyra went to the discipline annex and asked for the upcoming watch roster. The clerk refused politely. Lyra asked again, referencing the Academy's public safety bulletin and her own assigned compliance training. After a glance towards ceiling pod, the clerk slid a limited roster across the counter, shift blocks, and zones with names masked. Warden Ilex row appeared in the hallway, calm and tired in the way only long duty created. He matched her pace. You are collecting patterns, Ilex said. I'm trying to avoid errors, Lyra replied. Patterns become accusations, Ilex said. Then I will call them questions, Lyra said. Ilex studied her for a long moment. Field gate evaluation cycle is in 4 nights, Ilex said. That is when reputations are written. Do you expect trouble? Lyra asked. I expect a report that exists before the event, Ilex said. The event is just decoration. Back in her room, Lyra placed a masked roster beside the ghost line. Map unveils time marks. The overlaps pointed to a shift change in a corridor panel access near Fieldgate Yard. If Meridian wanted a public incident and VannaWorks wanted a private transfer, the evaluation night gave them both cover. Lyra opened the secure channel to Terran Oversight Cell and sent a short packet. Ghostline camera gap map indicates deliberate blind pocket and timed micro resets. Fieldgate evaluation cycle night is the probable activation window. The reply was 1 line. Build chain of custody. Lyra stared at it until it felt like weight on her chest. Chain of custody meant daylight, logs, and witnesses who could not be erased with a clever edit. Lyra did not form a team. She formed a minimum circle. Nemi Tao met her in a dining alcove, hands wrapped around a cup that had cooled. Nemi was a quiet student who had learned to survive by not being seen. They cut my privileges again, Nemi said. No reason. No explanation. They want you unstable, Lyra said. Unstable people sign anything. Oren Fay joined them last, arriving with the careful gait of someone who had learned the cost of being noticed. Oren was a rules reader, the kind of person who wanted the law to mean what it said. I can confirm a time, Oren said. That is all. If they know, I am done. You will file a safety concern as a student, Lyra said. That is allowed. Oren looked down. Allowed is not safe, Oren said. Lyra did not pretend otherwise. She gave him a choice that still let him keep his spine. You file it when you can see an officer's visor, Lyra said. Not when you are alone. Lyra met Warden Ilex row alone in a maintenance passage behind housing where the air smelled of coolant. He listened as she described the circle and the plan, and his face stayed controlled in a way that suggested he had heard similar plans fail. If you are wrong, Meridian will brand you a threat, Ilex said. If you are right, VannaWorks will decide you are a resource. Lyra opened her case and showed him the null route bait drive. Plain housing, no markings, designed to resemble restricted training telemetry. Then she showed the vault key decoy, a token meant to trigger an access request, not to grant one. They will reach for this, Lyra said. Control. Is their addiction? Only if the logs survive, Ilex said. Lyra nodded. Meridian cannot control Academy Security Division logs directly, Lyra said. But VannaWorks can control people. Ilex exhaled slowly. Then you need a mirror outside their hands, Ilex said. Cashmere would watch routing anomalies from public tables. Vale Karan would record time marks from public node clocks. Oren Fay would submit a safety ticket under his own identity, forcing a case number into the system. Nemi Tao would act like a target, drawing the coercers into repeating their method under evaluation noise. Lyra looked each person in the eye once. If this fails, you walk away, Lyra said. You say you never spoke to me. You do not defend me. You survive. Nemi swallowed and nodded. Oren's face tightened, but he did not leave. When Lyra returned to her room, her doorframe sensor patch showed a light vibration at a time she had been elsewhere. Someone had tested her space, gentle enough to deny and clear enough to warn. Her locker latch also smelled faintly of fresh polymer, a thin sealant layer that should not have been there. Lyra sealed the bait drive in a supply case and rehearsed the handoffs until they felt routine. Routine was how you stayed calm when someone tried to write you into their story. Fieldgate Yard looked like a controlled battlefield made for adult trainees. Modular barriers created lanes. Evaluation drones tracked movement. Observers stood behind transparent panels with clipboards and calm faces. Lyra arrived early and kept her posture ordinary. The null route bait drive pressed against her thigh like a secret. The vault key decoy sat against her wrist, silent. The first phase ran clean. Teams moved, halted, and moved again under neutral commands. A brief light flicker passed over the yard. Sync. A camera pod on the far perimeter logged a maintenance blink. The same narrow window again. Nemital had been reassigned to a different team without notice. He hesitated near a barrier, then forced himself forward. Oren Fay stood by a safety kiosk with his wrist unit ready, waiting for a moment when an officer would be close enough to witness his ticket submission. Kasia sat with the observer group, pad open on her lap. Vale lingered outside the fence near a public node clock, eyes fixed on its time readout. Lyra's wrist unit pinged within. Anonymous invite. Roster exchange circle. Bring the drive. Lyra did not reply. She set a marked supply case on a bench, leaving it half open as if she had been careless. She brushed her wrist against a maintenance panel as she passed. The vault key decoy broadcast a soft handshake request. Within seconds, her unit registered a probe, not Academy standard. It was cautious, as if the intruder feared alarms more than consequences. A technician in neutral coveralls approached with a slight limp and pocketed the drive. Lyra followed at a distance. The technician reached a service panel near the yard perimeter and pressed his palm to the reader. The panel opened. That was the moment the story could no longer be called rumor. Lyra submitted a safety ticket through the Academy Security Division channel, location and time only. A case number appeared on her screen, and she felt a small relief because case numbers were harder to erase than memories. Inside the yard, an alarm tone cut across the evaluation. A red icon flashed on the main display, warning of unauthorized device presence. A small sealed object sat near Nemital's barrier, metallic and deliberate, built to look like contraband. Lyra ran toward the planted object with her hands open. She stopped at the edge of the warning field and scanned it with her wrist unit so the nearest camera pod would record the request. The object broadcast nothing but a dead signal, a shell meant to trigger policy panic. Call security and verify chain of custody, Lyra said, loudly enough to land in the record. Academy Security Division officers pushed through the observers. Warden Ilex wrote arrived with them. Seal the field gate logs, Ilex said. Mirror to off-site storage now. Lyra turned and sprinted to the service corridor panel. An officer followed, close enough to witness. The technician was still there, half inside the corridor, drive in hand. He tried to slam the panel shut. Lyra caught the edge with her boot and shoved it open. She pinned his wrist to the bulkhead with her forearm and used leverage until his grip failed. The drive fell and clattered on the deck. Unauthorized access breach. The officer said into his mic, subject detained. Evidence recovered. The technician laughed once bitter. They will call you the threat anyway, he said. Lyra kept her voice flat. Not if the logs survive, she said. Back in the yard, the planted object was sealed in a containment sleeve. Nemital stood pale but steady, hands raised. Oren Fay filed his ticket under his own name while an officer stood 2 steps away, forcing a second case number into the system. Kasia copied the public routing anomaly into a sealed packet. Vale whispered time marks into his slate. Ilex approached Lyra after the technician was taken away. You won the logs? Ilex said. Lyra held the bait drive housing out to him, making sure the nearest camera captured the transfer. Then keep them alive, Lyra said. Ilex took it and leaned close. You're no longer just an exchange student, Ilex said. Lyra felt the ring's attention sharpen. At the edge of the crowd, Jex Roller recorded with a smaller smile, the kind that measured risk instead of celebrating. Lyra walked away from Fieldgate Yard with her hands steady and her cover cracked. The evidence was real. The cost was real. Somewhere on the ring, someone was already deciding how to retaliate without leaving another timestamp. Lyra Quell did not celebrate after Fieldgate Yard. A win on Kheledra High Ring was never a win for long. It was only a brief moment when the paperwork belonged to you. She walked back through Arclight Academy with the same neutral posture she had worn since arrival, but the air felt different, as if every vent carried a rumor. Warden Ilex Rowe did not speak to her in public, and that was its own message. He passed once at the edge of the concourse, visor down, hands clasped behind his back, and a single ping touched her wrist unit. It gave a meat point, a time window, and one sentence. Bring only what cannot be replaced. Lyra arrived at the maintenance passage behind housing and found a service case waiting on the deck. Inside, the bait drive housing sat in a sealed sleeve beside the incident packet, bundled with timestamps, case numbers, and mirrored routing anomalies. A matte black coin with a thin silver line rested on top, the handshake relay token. Ilex stepped out of shadow and held his gaze steady. "This goes off ring now," Ilex said. "If it stays here, it becomes a story." Lyra took the token and felt its weight, not physical but legal. "Terran Oversight Cell will receive it," Lyra said. "They will need the chain, not the noise." Lyra keyed the token against her wrist unit and watched the relay handshake complete, a short burst that rode a secured carrier link beyond Arclight's internal net. The upload was small by bandwidth standards, but it carried the kind of detail that broke careers and contracts. When the transfer finished, her unit displayed one line. "Packet received. Hold position." Hours later, Arclight Administrative Council convened in closed session, and the concourse screens filled with a carefully worded announcement. The council condemned coercion, affirmed student safety, and praised Academy Security Division for rapid response, then promised a full audit. It acknowledged a service access breach without naming who paid for it, and it suspended 2 subcontractor accounts as if that sealed the wound. There was no mention of VanaWorks procurement veil, no mention of compliance harvest program, and no mention of how long the gray walk gap had existed. Lyra read the statement twice and understood the strategy. Cut the visible wires and leave the deeper harness intact. They would publicize just enough to calm frightened students and bury enough to keep Arclight's neutrality funded. The storm did not vanish. It only changed direction. Meridian Information Bureau had been feeding the Meridian Sanction proposal into every conversation, framing it as a rational response to a dangerous world. After the packet went out, that push slowed, not from mercy, but from caution, because a vote now might invite questions about who had benefited from blind pockets and edited clips. On the third day, Jex Rawler's cropped videos began appearing with softer captions. The focus shifted from Lyra's hands to generic safety reminders. Brackenvar stopped walking like a man protected by certainty. Tarn Severick kept his gloves on and kept his head down. Lyra could feel a new kind of quiet, the quiet that promised memory. VanaWorks lost a branch, but the consortium did not collapse. It withdrew its fingers and left a bruise behind, a reminder of where it had touched. Lyra understood they would remember her not as a threat, but as a cost. Lyra did not have the luxury to stay and watch the cleanup. Terran Oversight Cell sent an extraction notice that arrived as a calendar change, bland and automatic. One instruction was embedded in the metadata. Depart within 72 hours. She spent those hours doing what? The council would not. Not speeches. Not cameras. Only small acts that could survive the next coercion. Nemitao met her in a study nook where the walls dampened sound and the tables were scarred from years of quiet stress. He looked older than when she first saw him, not by time, but by the price of being watched. His hands shook around a cup that had already cooled. Lyra placed a small slate on the table and slid it toward him. "This is a template," Lyra said. "Not a confession. It is a safety report that forces a case number." Nemi stared at the slate. "They will say I am causing trouble," Nemi said. "They will say I am unstable." "They already did," Lyra replied. "The difference is whether you leave a record they cannot erase." She showed him how to file through the Academy Security Division channel with a receipt, and how to mirror that receipt to a public node clock before anyone could rewrite it. She explained what to scan, what to photograph, and how to keep file headers intact so later edits left fingerprints. She also explained when to stop, because survival mattered more than righteous exhaustion. Oren Fay arrived with his shoulders tight, as if he expected a trap. Lyra did not offer comfort. She offered procedure, and his breathing slowed as the steps became concrete. She taught him how to request witness notation, how to insist on an officer's presence at submission, and how to name a location without naming a person, so the report forced an audit without inviting private retaliation. "If they isolate you," Lyra said, "you do not argue in a corridor. You argue in a ticket number." Cashmere and Vale Coran joined for one short meeting, both exhausted and stubborn. Lyra asked them for nothing they had not already risked, and she gave them one rule that applied on any station under any flag. Write it where more than one system can see it, Lyra said. A single log can be rewritten. 2 logs can fight back. They left with tools that looked boring to predators, a checklist, a schedule for mirroring receipts, and a list of public node clocks that were harder to tamper with. It was not justice and it was not revenge, but it was traction. By the time Lyra returned to the concourse, she noticed a change in the way people looked at her. Less certainty in their fear and more curiosity in their caution. A student she did not recognize approached and stopped at a polite distance. "Are you always like that?" the student asked. "Calm, even when it's ugly?" Lyra considered the question. "Calm is work you do inside," Lyra said. "It does not mean you are not angry." The student nodded slowly and stepped away, and Lyra felt the rumor shift in texture. It was no longer only about force. It was about discipline, and that frightened the right people. The day Lyra left Arclight Academy, the ring looked the same as on her arrival. Clean corridors, soft light, a neutral smile painted over machinery. She carried one case and nothing that looked classified, because anything that mattered had already traveled through the handshake relay token. The extraction route avoided the main docks and favored a service airlock where fewer eyes could claim a story. Warden Ilex Rowe met her at the threshold. He did not offer a handshake, only a final fact delivered with the precision of a report. Bracken Var will remain enrolled, Ilex said. The board will call it rehabilitation. Lyra kept her face still. And the technician? Lyra asked. Transferred to external custody, Ilex said. That is the cleanest sentence we can write. Lyra understood why Terran Oversight Cell had ordered her out. Staying would make her a permanent pressure point, and pressure points got removed, politely if possible and violently if not. As she crossed the airlock, her wrist unit flashed a new feed item from Concourse Media Cadre, a split-screen debate with half the ring calling her a hazard and half calling her proof that Arclight had been compromised. Meridian Information Bureau had not vanished. It had adjusted its angle, nudging the conversation toward oversight and restrictions without naming a target. Vanna Works did not speak at all, because a consortium did not argue in public. It wrote contracts and waited. The shuttle pulled away. The arc of Kheledra High Ring shrank into a thin line. Station lights blurred into the star field. Earth had achieved what it needed, at least for now. The Meridian-sanctioned proposal lost momentum, not because the galaxy became kind, but because the cost of pushing it rose, and because a dirty pipeline had been cut. The message was clear. To anyone who understood systems, Terra could be framed, but it could also frame back with evidence that survived edits. Lyra closed her eyes and let the vibration of the shuttle settle into her bones. She did not feel victorious. She felt used and useful at once, and those two feelings refused to separate. Behind her, Arclight kept functioning, and that was the most uncomfortable outcome of all, because it meant the next test would come for someone else. Somewhere on the ring, someone would ask a question no council statement could answer. Was Lyra Quell an exception, or was she a baseline sample from a world that had learned to survive in systems that wanted it small? The ring will keep calling itself neutral. Its lights will stay clean. Its rules will stay printed. Somewhere in its blind pockets, someone will keep trying to turn fear into policy. But the part they cannot edit is this. A system can be loud. A lie can be convenient. Yet evidence still has weight, and discipline still has teeth. Lyra Quell did not win by being the strongest. She won by refusing to be written into someone else's story. She left the academy with no applause, no speeches, and no banner behind her. Just a quiet record that could not be erased. And now Arclight is left with the same uncomfortable question. Was she an exception or a preview of what Earth is becoming? If this story kept you listening, help me keep making more like it. Tap like so the algorithm knows you want hard sci-fi with real stakes. Share it with a friend who loves smart, grounded stories. And subscribe for the next episode, because the people who lost today do not forgive. They only regroup.